Main event of the evening.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, we are discussing the 9th episode of Season 2 of The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, Around the World in 80 Ways.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Around the World in 80 Ways.
Ralph is lamenting that they'll probably never see Milwaukee again. Richie is more optimistic because everything is going smoothly now, which of course means that this is when everything goes wrong.
Cosmic calamities!
See what I mean?
The console malfunctions, and as Cupcake tries to get it working again, she pulls a specific lever. The time machine lands inside the trophy of the 1913 Around the World race, because the gang has been shrunk to heights of a few inches.
We're not even knee-high to a spark plug.
Ralph's panicking causes the trophy to fall over and the gang to fall out. Cupcake is able to zap everyone back to their normal sizes, so one of their problems has been solved. Unfortunately, she forgets the time machine is still in the trophy.
No one gets their hands on this trophy unless they win the race.
Fonzie has a solution. They'll win the race themselves. The early lead is taken by Simon Chance and Purity Goodacre, a couple who discuss how they totally sabotaged all the other contestants' cars.
Did you take care of the other cars like we planned, my dear?
Exactly like we planned, Simon.
But since the gang literally just got their car, it's still functional, and they soon overtake the villainous duo. Simon pulls the lever in their car, and they rocket past the gang.
Hey, buckos! What's the idea?
Isn't that against the rules?
In this race, Cuppers, I got a feeling there are no rules.
Cupcake zaps their car into an actual rocket, but she forgot to add controls, so the rocket can basically only go forward. Simon and Purity destroy the only bridge for miles around after they cross it, and then the gang crash into the river. Luckily, a riverboat passes by, and the gang climb aboard.
All right, gang, we got to do some heavy thinking here. Right, Fonz, because we're going north when we want to go west.
Since the boat isn't going the route they need it to go, Cupcake zaps up a whole new tributary, changing the course of the Mississippi River, and Fonzie makes some changes to the riverboat's engine so it goes faster. When the riverboat stops, the gang tries to get a new car, only to learn a couple of other city folk already bought every car in town and destroyed them.
Some feller and his gal just bought up every car we got, tore them all apart. Can't figure them city folk sometimes.
While Fonzie and Mr. Cool try to salvage parts from the destroyed cars into a new motorcycle, Richie, Ralph, and Cupcake stop by the local soda shop. Ralph immediately gets on the bad side of the local toughs.
3 strawberry sodas, please.
And, hold the straws.
Oh, Ralph.
The gang speeds away. Fonzie, Cupcake, and Mr. Cool on the bike, and Richie and Ralph in the sidecar. Simon and Purity try to crush them with a boulder. And to dodge it, Fonzie detached the sidecar, allowing them all to swerve around it before they rejoin. They travel up to the North Pole.
Trust me, Fonz, the ocean's the narrowest up here in the Arctic.
And the bike breaks down due to the cold. Simon and Purity appear on a snowmobile, and use some kind of heat ray in their vehicle to break the ice that the gang is on, causing them to begin floating out to sea, along with a polar bear. Certain that their victory is assured, Simon and Purity depart for China.
That's the last we'll see of them, Purity.
Next stop, China.
The polar bear menaces Ralph, so Cupcake divides the flow with a zap. Away floats the polar bear, along with the bike. Very conveniently, their flow melts right on top of a submarine.
Good thinking, Fonz.
Yeah, not bad. How do I do it? Hey.
They make it to Shanghai. While Fonzie and Mr. Cool are buying train tickets, Simon and Purity use a rickshaw to kidnap Richie and Ralph, and Cupcake's attempt to help only zaps her inside of a giant fortune cookie.
How do I get myself into these things?
Richie and Ralph are brought to a room where Simon and Purity remove the stairs and cause it to start flooding, while Fonzie rescues Cupcake from her cookie prison. Ralph and Richie begin shouting for help in Chinese. As it turns out, this is the one word Ralph knows in every language.
Show me! Show me!
Fonzie, Cupcake, and Mr. Cool find and rescue Richie and Ralph, and then is off on the train to Paris. In the City of Lights, the gang gets a note from Simon to meet him on top of the Eiffel Tower to discuss giving up.
Gee, that's great. They're gonna give up.
I think they mean us giving up, Ralph.
Oh.
The gang do so in order to confront and stop their rivals, but when they get there, they only find a pair of decoys. The real Simon and Purity pull the switch of the elevator. The drop will be so severe that, in Simon's words, they won't know what hit them.
We're out of control!
Worse! Ralph's out of control!
Simon and Purity's car turns into a plane with the push of a button, and off they fly. Cupcake to the rescue. With a zap, the elevator turns into a hot air balloon.
Hooray!
She did it!
I guess I work best under pressure.
It's a direct path towards New York, the trophy, and the time machine. And then the balloon disintegrates over the Atlantic Ocean and a whole lot of sharks. Again, conveniently, they're saved by a passing vehicle, a plane that catches them before they hit the water. The pilot is fine with flying them to New York.
Where are you headed? New York! And we'd appreciate it if you could step on it.
And even lets Fonzie take control while he takes a nap. The gang pass by Simon and Purity, who are so shocked that they crash into a tree. The gang is awarded the trophy.
Congratulations, you've won.
Won? What did we win? We'll explain it all later.
Yeah.
And Fonzie takes back the time machine. All that's left is for Cupcake to zap it back to full size. Except she zaps it into a bullfrog instead. It hops away, and the gang chase after it.
I just hope this doesn't turn out to be another around-the-world hop.
Thank you, Peter. That was Around the World in 80 Ways. It first aired back on November 14th, 1981. The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang was followed by a rerun of the Richie Rich Scooby-Doo show, which was already out of new episodes by this point in the season. Aww. CBS aired the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show, and NBC had a new episode of The Smurfs. This week, 100 Smurfs are needed to perform a special dance that will restore good luck to Smurf Village. So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
The Smurfs. I never expected to become emotionally invested in the Smurfs through this podcast.
I would have to watch the Smurfs as well. I would be curious to find out why they needed good luck to be restored to Smurf Village. What did they do? Around the World in 80 Ways was directed by Ray Patterson, George Gordon, and Rudy Zamora. It was written by Dwayne Poole and Tom Swale. We have some songs this week. Once again, Mr. Cool hums Help Me Rhonda by the Beach Boys. This time it's while shuffling cards.
Like the Bye Bye Birdie reference in an earlier episode, it is of course anachronistic because Mr. Cool is a dog from 1957 and Help Me Rhonda is from 1965.
When the characters arrive in Paris, we hear La Marseillaise, the national anthem of France.
Traveling time warps Paris, and the Eiffel Tower. Isn't this terrific?
It was written in 1792 when France declared war against Austria. It became the official anthem in 1795 and was a rallying call during the later years of the French Revolution. Peter, what I want to know from you is, in the pantheon of national anthems, where do you rank France's national anthem? At the top, in the middle, or toward the bottom?
I can't say which national anthem is the best because I have not heard all of them, but La Marseillaise is pretty high up. It gets the blood pumping. However long you were listening to La Marseillaise, you are French. I would say it compares very well to our national anthem. I think that the American national anthem is very bad. And if you can make it sound good, then you might be a wizard.
The national anthem of this country, the Star-Spangled Banner, is going to have to be rewritten very soon. Nobody sings it on the way to work anymore. Remember the good old days? You'd pass a guy going to work. Oh, say, can you see? Hello, Dr. Brown.
As for cultural and historical references this week, this episode takes its title and some of its plot from Jules Verne's 1872 novel Around the World in 80 Days, in which a wealthy British man named Phileas Fogg attempts to circumnavigate the globe in just 80 days in order to win a bet.
Are you formally challenging me to undertake a journey around the world in 80 days?
This episode differs from Verne's story in a few ways, however.
Hey, Burn!
For instance, Phileas Fogg is not racing against any other competitors in the novel, just time. Also, Fogg's journey starts and ends in London, not New York. And since the story takes place in 1872, Fogg only travels via ship and train, not automobile. However, the Oscar-winning 1956 film adaptation of Around the World in 80 Days, starring David Niven, does prominently feature a hot air balloon. So that's how hot air balloons got into the story and why we get one in this episode.
Since the novel is from the 1870s and this takes place in the 1910s, my headcanon is that it takes place in the same universe. After Phileas Fogg did his Around the World in 80 Days thing, now they have a competition every year for it.
Well, the other major influence on this episode is the 1965 film The Great Race, directed by Blake Edwards and starring Tony Curtis, Jack Lemmon, and Natalie Wood.
It's the fabulous around-the-world race from New York to Paris. A rambunctious, rib-busting riot of a race.
That film is set in 1908 and centers around two daredevils, the great Leslie and Professor Fate, who race by automobile from New York to Paris. Amazingly, this film was inspired by a real-life New York to Paris automobile race. The costumes worn by Simon and Purity in this episode are very similar to those worn by Tony Curtis and Natalie Wood in The Great Race. That film was also a precursor to Hanna-Barbera's 1968 series, Wacky Races.
The most daredevil group of daffy drivers to ever whirl their wheels in the Wacky Races, competing for the title of the world's wackiest racer.
What I thought was interesting was that since they've already done a black-hatted, mustache-twirling villain on Fonzie and the Happy Days Gang, they couldn't reuse the Jack Lemmon villain from The Great Race. So they turn the Tony Curtis and Natalie Wood characters into the bad guys, which I thought was a pretty brilliant twist on the story.
Yeah, it really is. It's also very funny with the context of the Wacky Races inspiration, because Simon is a dead ringer for Peter Perfect, but evil.
Ralph says that he and the other characters are living in a disaster movie.
Might as well accept it, Rich. We're living in a disaster movie.
Well, films built around large-scale catastrophes have been around since at least the 1930s. That term wasn't in widespread use until the 1970s. Disaster movies were incredibly popular in the 70s, with such hits as The Poseidon Adventure, The Towering Inferno, Airport, and Earthquake. Are you a fan of disaster movies?
Not really, no. I really like The Towering Inferno because it got Fred Astaire an Oscar nomination, and he's great in that.
Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Fred Astaire, Robert Vaughn, and Robert Wagner. Irwin Allen's production of The Towering Inferno. See it for Christmas at a theater near you. Rated PG.
This week, our heroes find themselves in New York in 1913, just 5 years after the Great Race supposedly takes place. And just as in that film, most of the cars are eliminated quickly from the race because they've been sabotaged by the villains. That's a plot point taken directly from the Great Race.
I'm telling you all it's sabotage!
Ralph says he wants to get back to Milwaukee as a 38 regular.
The time machine's my only chance to get back to Milwaukee as a 38 regular.
The 38 refers to his chest measurement, and the regular refers to the length of his suit jacket. So if you ever wanted to know Ralph Malph's suit measurements, now you know them. When Ralph gets his head stuck in a loving cup, this is very similar to Lucy and the Loving Cup, an episode of I Love Lucy that originally aired in January 1957. Have you seen that one, Peter?
Yes, it's a classic.
Ralph says they're about to be swallowed by a whale.
It's a whale that's going to swallow us.
He's referring to the biblical book of Jonah, which tells the story of a prophet who initially disobeys a direct order from God to travel to Nineveh. Jonah suffers some serious consequences as a result of his disobedience, including being swallowed by a great fish, often depicted in art as a whale. Luckily, God saves him, and Jonah eventually travels to Nineveh as ordered. Most scholars agree that the entire story of Jonah is fictional and has no basis in history whatsoever.
Oh, what a shame.
They say Jonah, he was swallowed by a whale. But I say there's no truth to that tale.
Neither Around the World in 80 Days nor The Great Race features a scene with riverboat gamblers. However, The Great Race does spend some time in a western frontier town, complete with a saloon brawl, so that's where that comes in. The characters in The Great Race also travel to the Bering Strait during a snowstorm. While they're up there, they drift for a while on an ice floe and have to contend with a polar bear. By the way, Richie is correct that polar bears are only found in the northern hemisphere.
You know, if we were at the South Pole, we wouldn't be in this spot. Polar bears are only found in the northern hemisphere.
Good, Rich. Very, very good. I had no idea.
In fact, the greatest concentration of polar bears in the world is found in Greenland, where Ralph and Richie were eventually stationed in the army. Both Around the World in 80 Days and The Great Race have passages set in Asia. Phileas Fogg travels through both Japan and China. He even spends some time in Shanghai, just like the characters in this episode. The Great Race, on the other hand, goes through the fictional country of Carpania. I was a little worried when this episode detoured into Asia that we were going to get some embarrassing stereotypes, but I think they mostly steered clear of it.
By virtue of having no people in Shanghai at all. I would find that questionable, but they did the same thing with Paris. I think it's just a case of time and budget. So Shanghai and Paris are ghost towns now. Probably the most questionable moment would have been when Cupcake accidentally zapped herself into a fortune cookie, but that's not beyond the pale. It's just a little bit questionable.
Well, as you mentioned, Cupcake does find herself trapped in a giant fortune cookie. Although these cookies are often served at Chinese restaurants in America, their origin is unclear. Some think they were brought to America by Japanese immigrants. While she's in the fortune cookie, Cupcake yells, "Help! I'm a prisoner in a Chinese fortune cookie." This is a variation on a joke that goes back to the 1940s and 50s and has been used in comic books, animated cartoons, and stand-up comedy routines for decades. I couldn't find any specific origin for it, but Daffy Duck does a version of it in the 1959 film China Jones.
Help! I'm being held prisoner in a Chinese bakery.
And comedian Alan King released a book called Help, I'm a Prisoner in a Chinese Bakery in 1964. The idea is that somebody's being held prisoner somewhere and they're using the fortune cookie message to send for help, like throwing a message in a bottle, basically. Ralph says the Chinese word for help is Zhao Ming.
If only we knew the Chinese word for help.
It's Zhou Ming.
How do you know that?
It's the one word I know in every language.
This is true. There are lots of words for help in Chinese, depending on what you need it for, but this is how you would call for help in an emergency. I was surprised that Fonzie and the Happy Days gang actually got this right.
That's impressive for a 1980s Saturday morning cartoon.
Once our heroes get to Paris, they immediately head to the Eiffel Tower, a 1,000-foot-tall iron tower constructed in the 1880s. It is still the tallest structure in Paris and was originally meant to be the centerpiece of the 1889 World's Fair. Incidentally, civil engineer Gustave Eiffel, whose company designed the tower, also helped to design the inner structure of the Statue of Liberty, which is also seen twice in this episode. So if you're a Gustave Eiffel fan, this episode is great for you. The overhead view that we get of Paris, however, does not correspond with any map that I could find.
Yes, it's a lot of squiggles.
Mr. Cool says up, up, and away. This catchphrase goes back to Superman's 1940s radio show. It was meant to let listeners know that Superman was flying. Other observations this week. Ralph laments that he will never see Milwaukee again.
We might as well face it, Rich. We're never going to see Milwaukee again as long as we live.
Is he forgetting that he and Richie saw Milwaukee just a few weeks ago in Double Jeopardy?
Probably yes. Ralph is a bit of a drama queen.
Do our heroes just straight up steal a car?
Yes.
Lucky we found this old car nearby, Fonz.
Yes, they do. They're traveling through time. They're desperate. From their point of view, everyone in this episode is already dead. It's fine.
Richie gets to say bucko twice this week, and Fonzie says exactamundo. So they're still working in phrases from Happy Days, occasionally, which is nice. I don't think the characters make a big enough deal out of Cupcake literally changing the course of the Mississippi River.
Gosh, she's changed the course of the entire Mississippi River.
And she didn't screw up.
This will have a major impact on America and ultimately the entire world, environmentally, socially, and economically. Peter, is this the most powerful thing that Cupcake has ever done?
It might be. Didn't she do something to the sun in one episode?
Yes, she is able to block out the sun when she needs to.
I think the gang should be nicer to Cupcake just because when she does things right, she can be very dangerous. And when she does things wrong, she can also be very dangerous, but less.
What do you think the situation is between Simon and Purity? Are they dating or what?
I think that they are absolutely a couple. The scene where Simon is about to push the boulder down so the gang gets squished, and Purity is like, ooh, Simon, I love it when you're villainous. And he's like, then you're gonna love this.
Oh, Simon, I love it when you're villainous like this.
Then catch this action, Purity. You'll be crazy about it.
Today they would be influencers, or they would be Instagrammers or TikTokers. You know, that's exactly what they would be today.
They do mention near the end of the episode that they really want the publicity that comes with winning the race. So, yeah, I think you're right on the money.
In a few short moments, Purity, my dear, that gold trophy will be ours.
Not to mention all the publicity, Simon. We'll be famous.
At least twice in this episode, the characters are saved by pure coincidence and luck. They do not solve their own problems, but are randomly saved by others. That bothered me a little bit because normally Fonzie will think of something to get them out of a jam, or he'll do something to get them out of trouble. But this week, they're just saved randomly by passing strangers at a couple of very crucial moments. I don't know. Did that bother you?
A little bit, yeah. I think that what it comes down to is pacing, because this is an episode where a lot of stuff happens, and a lot of other stuff just kind of gets glossed over, because this has to be like 20 minutes long, so they can't be as detailed with things as maybe they should.
They're just saved by Deus Ex Machina a couple of times. Also this week, they don't save anybody or they don't help anybody. Normally, whenever they're dropped into a particular time period and place, they have to fix some problem before they're allowed to leave. This week, they don't do any good for anybody. Purity, however, manages to pick up both Ralph and Richie while sitting in a rickshaw.
You want clothes? I'll give you clothes.
Hey, wait!
You have to respect that kind of upper body strength.
Yeah, that was great.
Purity is definitely not skipping arm day. We learned something new about Minnie Mouth this week. She's a lousy swimmer.
Mom couldn't help at a time like this. She's a lousy swimmer.
I did not know that. So thank you, Ralph, for giving us some insight into your mother. And I am totally baffled by the scene in which Fonzie consults a map to figure out how to get from Paris to New York.
Yeah, it'd be more terrific if I could figure out which way New York is from here.
What's he looking at? A world map? He's like looking for a street. Like, what street in Paris will take me to New York? Cupcakes has a lot of catchphrases this week.
Cosmic calamities twice, terrible time warps, leaping liftoffs twice, villainous Venus,
aquatic asteroids, crackling comets, sizzling sunspots, shivering Saturn, traveling time warps, and moon craters.
A weird week for Mr. Cool. Were there times when he makes things better? Yes. He throws Richie and Ralph a life preserver. There were some times, however, when he made things worse. Even though Cupcake tells him not to, Mr. Cool sprays the time machine controls with a fire hose, soaking Richie and short-circuiting the controls in the process. This has become a weird pattern for Mr. Cool. In season 2, Cupcake will tell him not to do something, and then he just does it and causes chaos and destruction. So that's something to work on for Mr. Cool.
You gotta work on that, man. Bad dog.
And Fonzie sends Mr. Cool to find Richie and Ralph, but all he does is get a bird cage stuck on his head, which is not helpful.
Is what I'm doing helping?
And I thought, later he's going to redeem himself and he'll find Richie and Ralph, but that's not how it works. Did he suffer physically and mentally? A little bit. The fire hose whips him around pretty badly, but he brought that on himself.
You brought this on yourself.
He fails to jump onto the riverboat, and then he gets caught by the ship's paddle and thrown onto a gambling table, and he clings to the wing of a biplane and looks terrified. That's the only time where I felt Fonzie was a bad pet owner. There's a moment where Mr. Cool is on the wing of the plane, and Fonzie is just,
hang tight, pup, we got some flying to do.
Your dog is on the wing of a plane. You've got to save him. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in Around the World in 80 Ways?
I really love Simon and Purity's driving outfits. Purity's got the scarf tied around her head and over her hat, and she's got the goggles, and Simon has the little driving cap and his own pair of goggles, and he's wearing sort of like jodhpurs and a very snazzy coat. Very stylish.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old, timeless question. Was this episode any good?
This episode was a lot of fun. I think it broke with some of the formulas in a lot of very fun ways. And Simon and Purity are some of my favorite villains to appear on the entire show. But the fact that this has to be less than half an hour long means it has to be really truncated. And that leads to some kind of unsatisfying moments, like the gang just conveniently getting saved by passing vehicles a couple of times. And there's also the fact that, as mentioned before, Shanghai and Paris are just ghost towns in this episode. I kind of wish that this episode had been a two-parter. I think that would have given the story more time to breathe. They would have gotten more chances to shove in absolutely insane stuff, which is always a plus.
I would agree that this episode probably had to be a two-parter, but I enjoyed the stuff that we did get. I think they could have cut the riverboat gambler stuff because I don't think that added too much to the episode, but I especially liked the trip to the western frontier town because I like the two old timers who sit outside and watch everything happen and have just seen so much that they are barely interested in what's happening.
And they don't even really seem to care that Simon and Purity destroyed every car in town. Just, yeah, this seems like a likely thing for city folk to do. City folk are weird.
Even though this episode doesn't manage to capitalize on all of its sequences fully, I was glad that we got so much stuff in one episode and so many different scenes, so many different locations. In a way, this feels like a greatest hits album for the Fonz and the Happy Days gang because it allows them to revisit places they've been before, the Wild West, a cold climate where it's snowing, Asia. This feels like a Whitman sampler of everything that the show can do in one convenient half-hour episode. So perhaps if you're only watching one episode of the Fonz and the Happy Days gang, Around the World in 80 Ways is a good one to watch because it stands in for all the other ones, or at least a half dozen of the other ones. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow me on Blue Sky at petervolfranc.bsky.social.
And they can follow me on Blue Sky at joeblevins.bsky.social. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket next time we talk?
Next time, the gang travel back to 12th century Central Africa to help a queen rescue her kidnapped father in All This and Timbuktu.
That sounds like a very busy episode to me, so see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Hey!
What? Love tries to come on. It's going around the world and coming home again. Playing around the world, coming on, my friend. Love tries to oh yeah.
held prisoner in a Chinese bakery.